Hello, everyone, and welcome to our sixth event in the Nightlight Poetry and Conversation series. My name is Tom Snarski, and I'm delighted to be here with you tonight on this Valentine's Day Boxing Day, hosting Anne and Kirby Kenny of Lamb Press and Josh Dale of 30 West Publishing House. I'm really excited about this event because Anne, Kirby, and Josh are all here in dual capacities this evening. They take the Zoom stage not only as marvelous writers of their own original work, which you're going to get to hear during the reading slots that will open our program, but also as publishers who are thinking about the holy and painstaking task of bringing books into the world. After their readings, I'm very much looking forward to facilitating a conversation and a Q&A with Anne, Kirby, and Josh to hear more about their creative lives and how Lamb and 30 West grew out of their artistic practice and continue to grow in really exciting new directions for both presses. Just before we dive in, I want to say a quick word about the series. We took a little bit of a hiatus over the holiday. We didn't have a reading in January, but if you haven't listened in before, Nightlight is a reading series featuring poets and writers, new and established, about monthly. We're hosted virtually on usually the third Thursday of the month at 9 p.m. Eastern. And at each of our events, we feature anywhere from a small group like this one to a bigger lineup of readers to share a selection of their work with us and sometimes chat afterwards if we have time. Having slots for readers every month means that we're always looking for folks who would be interested in participating. So if you are or know a poet or writer who'd be interested in sharing their work at a future event, please get in touch with us. We would love to hear from you. And we're on a bunch of social media platforms. We have a Nightlight Poems Twitter account and night_light_poems_ account on Instagram where it's harder to get good usernames. Or you can just get in touch with me directly at Tom Snarski on Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky, tomsnarski@gmail.com. I would love to hear from you. And all of our fun reading events tend to happen because somebody reached out and was like, hey, let's do something. And it's always really wonderful when that happens. So without further ado, you've heard plenty from me. So what I'd like to do to start things off now is invite our first pair of readers up to share their work with us in Anne and Kirby Kenny. And Anne and Kirby Kenny are American writers and filmmakers whose work has been published in Ghost City Review, Ouroboros Lit Journal, Rogue Agent, and more. They are the co-founders of Lamb Press, an independent publisher of hybrid works of poetry, photography, and art. Their debut collection, New Myths, which is an absolutely astonishingly good book that I'm like so excited will be out on the world very soon, will be released in October 2024 through Lamb Press. Anne and Kirby, thank you so much for being here with us. Take it away. I'm excited to hear what you're going to read.
Thank you for having us. Yeah, and thanks for that introduction and also the kind words about New Myths. Always appreciate it. Yeah. So I'm going to read first, and I'm going to actually read two poems from New Myths and then two new poems. But I'm going to read from the book that we produced. This is the first book from Lamb. So let me start. Okay. Natural man, we made it to the jungle, a land dank and full and impossibly fat. You disappeared and became a natural man. I had to become the jungle, live on scraps and keep strands of hair. Wear me as a symbol of blood, and you as a symbol of man. Softly mewling your name, I kept you close. I had to believe in my love, know the extent of it, and believe it would reach you. Did you fight the drug war? No answer. Does the light shine where you are? No answer. Do you have a new body? Is it the sun body? No answer. No answer. I thought you were silent, but really, I couldn't hear you yet. Okay. Okay. And the second poem from New Myths I'll be reading is titled Pilgrims. Where is the one who watches without food, but with water? He racks another 50 notches. My vision drawn from the mirror. It seems I may go away soon. Still, I breathe air and travel with low spirits. I gather visions like fate. They appear and hide at will. A decade since, and the water is collected from the same place. It is some form of wetness in the dull whoosh of wind. So that's that. And then these are two new poems from, it's a collection that we're working on. It's kind of going to be our follow-up to New Myths, but it's really early. So these really haven't had more than a pass, but what the hell? Okay. Okay. Parts. When you don't speak the language, sorry becomes meaningless. When your weight gives and leaves a stain, it changes shape too. It changes with each story. With each year, you change. There's nowhere you won't probe. Eyes, nose, knees. No blend of shame and veneration you won't pray over. Gums, teeth, tongue, preyed upon, so nothing is safe. No throat, no groin, no elbow or toe. Okay, and then my last one. Letter. Baby, I know you feel scared. I know you have to break the very bones of your being, the double helix that stands you up, the choices that were never yours. And you have to feel those tender words, those frantic hugs, that desperation for love. I feel you facing the absences captured in those soft, glossy mirrors, how they cracked your chest womb open like an earthy nut. I remember those hands on you. You didn't deserve any of it. Just wanted for the tiny appearances of care to stay, to mean something real, to feel like real love. Okay. I am in similar fashion also going to read two from New Myths and then some new work. It's a single poem broken up into sections. It doesn't have a title, so I'm just gonna go with it. Okay. Paradise. You grab my hand and conjure a dark world where the palm goes under. The center lifts higher, where the girl in me is offered. Hot and special, I am that jungle dancer. I make sense of love. What is this seed bearing the truth of my power? A black speck in a puddle. Stare, girl. My heart shows me to me, you to me. I recognize something new. Taste the new. The trees arch their backs. They open as an orifice, and the snakes, they hiss. The floor and walls share each other. I birth a new head, chest, arm. What if this is dream? I am the mirror. I am the mating dance that pledges the body to the barn. A conquest. Fear the dark omen, vessels on a distant shore. No more. Dark tobacco burns your hunger. Your ships sink off the coast of what you think is Asia. No, it's not so known. It's us. You get lost in the new world. You hope to spread the word of man no more. In time, the nation constrains you to death. So untie that measly line from your neck and stop talking. So that's from New Myths. And this is new shit. Suppose I have this body. She's built to run, sob, combust in the sun. And suppose this body can only guess my name. Perhaps the cross this young body imagined was meant for God too, to know suffering. Don't you know love is sacrifice? More persistent even than my own will. Is that not faith? When I try to remember, it's like I don't know. I felt a hand and it went in. What I'm trying to say is, I want that hand and I want all of it. But the room grows larger each day. The pregnancy, how the ground swells. And last night was really something. The dust never settles. I know I'm afraid. The air is loud, cold, breaking. There's an emptiness about his face I should know. Love run off into the lake and into the next life. But I see that in the sky, your eye lies a home in all of this. I fall down before you. We fell in our words. The earth opened up and you fell from that place too. Only backwards and into the sky. That's new shit. Thank you. Thanks for listening. Thanks, guys.
Amazing. Thank you all so much for starting us off on that beautiful note. There were so many, like, the chat was blowing up with not only lines, like, with this fun little waterfall pastiche of new myths, but also just like so many feelings of like elemental. The word raw is here. That was fantastic. Thank you again. That was Anne and Kirby Kenny, who are here not only as writers of new myths forthcoming from Lamb Lamb Press, but also as co-founders of Lamb Lamb Press. And we'll hear a little bit more about that work in a bit. But if you want to learn more about Anne and Kirby in the interim, you can find them on Instagram at Anne and Kirby World, ANNANDKIRBYWORLD. And you can also find Lamb Lamb Press on Instagram at Lamb Lamb Press, LAMB, so without further ado, and with great gratitude to our leadoff readers, I'm excited to introduce our next reader, who is also here in a dual capacity, in Josh Dale. And Josh well, rather, I should say first, Josh is a native Pennsylvanian, loved his cat, loves his loud guitar music, loves publishing books, does so with 30 West Publishing House. Josh, thank you and your tremendous roadside background for being here with us. Very excited to hear what you're going to read. All you.
Well, thank you for the introduction, Tom. And it was great hearing you, Anne and Kirby. That was just a lovely reading and just, oh man, I just can't get enough of it. All right. So my reading is going to be a little different. Let me pull up my file here. So instead of poetry, we're actually going to go to a conference, Meet Depot's annual conference. Thank you. Thank you so much, everybody. Welcome to Meet Depot's annual conference. Yeah. Oh, man. Are you ready? Because we got something good for you today. Oh, yeah. Introducing from Meat Depot, the Meat Man. Meat Depot is honored to reanimate this horrifying creature into existence. The Meat Man has new, exciting features such as realistic meat teeth, intelligent meat vocabulary, thicker meat arms. Yeah. The Meat Man may be evil dead. The Meat Man may be criminally insane. The Meat Man may be devoured by vermin. Oh my goodness. Oh, and there he goes. The Meat Man. There he goes. Wave. Wave to the Meat Man. He's driving the meat van. The Meat Man drives the meat van owned by Meat Depot. The Meat Man markets human meat, from the meat van, from Meat Depot. Yeah, finger guns, jazz hands. The meat man is the block captain of Drury Lane. The meat man has an exclusive contract with the Muffin Man. The meat man bakes Meat Depot meat into the Muffin Man's muffins. Oh yeah. Oh, there. Oh, boo. There he goes. The meat man makes Pac-Man run away in fear. There he goes. The meat man turns ghost red like the blood he shall soon spill. The meat man cuckolds Pac-Man. Oh, geez, steamy in here by seducing Miss Pac-Man on the final level. Oh my goodness. Oh, and here comes our special guest, the, the Meat Man and the Hat Man. Ooh, they are a notorious duo, folks. The Meat Man and the Hat Man traumatize you at 2:39 a.m. Oh, geez. Oh, the Meat Man and the Hat Man are just standing there menacingly. Oh, oh man, this is just one great conference, but ooh, we have to think about this league. Yeah, boo, Justice League. Well, guess what? The Meat Man becomes the chief and rebrands to the Just Meat League. The Meat Man then court martials Superman, Batman, and Aquaman with unanimous support. Hooray! I think that's how unions work. Yay! Oh, the Meat Man. Ooh, the Meat Man. He claims Eggman is not a walrus, no, but a little bitch. The Meat Man challenges the Eggman on UFC 300. Goo goo gajoob or whatever. Yay! Hooray! We can't forget the most important enemy of Meat Man. Ooh, big scary. The Meat Man locks the meat van's doors when he drives through Slender Man's hood. Oh boy, I'm getting a little chilly in here. Oh, the Meat Man. He carries a loaded meat pistol for if and when that day comes, folks. He is all Depot. And the Meat Man is the triumph of Meat Depot. Oh, coming soon in 2024. Embrace the Meat Man effect. All right. Ooh, that's my reading.
Thank you so much. And that was Josh Dale, who you can find on the socials at JDale Writes, JDaleWrites, which is the same on Instagram, Twitter, Blue Sky, Facebook, everywhere. You can also check out Josh's work at joshdale.co, C-O, not a typo, joshdale.co. And the forthcoming chapbook, Behold Infinite Fire, is coming from Frequent and Vigorous Chapbooks this spring. I love Frequent. That's MD's, right, Josh?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's correct.
that's fantastic. How exciting. I'm very excited for that chap and for just anything frequent and vigorous. That is beautiful. And awesome. So with that, you've gotten to hear a little bit of work from Anne and Kirby and from Josh in their capacity as original writers of their own amazing work that you just got to hear a little sampling of there. But I'm also really excited to invite them here as publishers as well. You know, the work that they've done into bring 30 West Publishing House and Lamb Lamb Press into the world. So I was hoping to maybe start this conversation, and I'll just kind of make a blanket statement before I do that. Anyone in the chat is it's fair game to use this space to kind of throw out any ideas that you have, especially if you have questions or thoughts about the beautiful work that you just heard. Since I prepared these questions not having known that work, but you have probably a bunch of reactions that you want to share with that. I was hoping maybe we could start just by hearing a little bit from you all because um, I don't think it happens often enough personally that we recognize that like folks starting and running indie presses are doing so kind of as artists, as fellow artists a lot of the time. And that's like that there's a whole just creative life that's living behind and alongside the choice to start a press. And I wonder, if I could invite maybe Ann and Kirby to share a little bit about like what was it about where you were in life, in creative life, in the creative path, that made starting Lamb Lamb kind of make sense? And then we can maybe hear from Josh kind of the same story in terms of 30 West.
So basically, we've always wanted to be in the creative space. Our first kind of love has always been filmmaking, and but ultimately, when we first started writing, it was actually poetry that was the first kind of medium. Working on new myths for a really long time, not felt so precious to us, we weren't sure. And some early experiences in previous industry had us feel really wary of giving our intellectual property away. And so what we decided when we went to, our main focus was, what is the best way to maintain or retain the IP? And where that road would take us, we're like, let's just focus on new myths and go from there. And the more we kept kind of pursuing and pulling at that thread, the more it became clear that, our love of many different forms of art, like we mentioned, Leyland's poetry, photography, and art, could find a home in a press that we ran, and we could feel really good about not only having a better home for new myths, but for other artists as well, for other writers. And then also once we started working with new myths, especially connecting with you, Tom, and William Erickson, we were so pleased at the connections we were making with people, the just like human connections of other poets in the industry or in the field, whatever you want to call it, that we thought Lamb Lamb would be such a beautiful way to keep connecting to like-minded writers and artists. And so kind of all of that.
And I'll just add also, as just such staunch lovers of poetry, it also felt like a really beautiful way to give back to the medium and an act of service to poetry for how much it has given us, and for the ability to get other people's work out there in a way that feels really supportive of the vision. And because there are, so many creative industry experiences where artists don't feel heard or listened to, or like they really have much of a say in what they're putting out into the world. And so that was a big part of it as well, just wanting to be an advocate for artists the way we've wished we've had advocates as artists. So
yeah, totally, to have like a safe space for creatives felt really important. And then lastly, and then we'll kick it off to Josh, the multidisciplinary approach of Lamb Lamb felt really valuable to us, because we feel sometimes poetry as an art form gets like pushed to the side a little bit, especially in more modern times. I think it depends on whose poetry you're reading, but in general, we thought it might be a really beautiful way to bring poetry into the fold of other visual arts and vice versa. So that was the approach for that.
Well, that's a lovely statement. I'm happy to hear that. I guess for with 30 West, funny enough, like I don't really have a lot of experience, or at the time in 2015, I didn't have any experience. I was an undergrad at Temple University, and I took this elective. It was called Writers at Work, and in I guess in foresight, I didn't realize that this course was going to keep going. So I'm happy to be part of it at the time. But I essentially founded 30 West in a classroom. And my professor he's a poet, Brian Tier, poet and micro publisher. We went over kind of like, okay, let's emulate a press that we can find. In this case, we had examples of his connections, and building with that human connection. We got to like interview the other presses and talk to them, or even meet them and see their books or their wares, depending on what they made. And I just kind of like ran away with it. I made the logo. Well, actually, I commissioned the logo, but that original logo of just like it's like kind of like a hand drawn type, or like a sketch like an architect would make. That was the original 30 West logo, and essentially that blossomed into this wonderful journey that I've been on for close to like 8.5 years at this point. And I feel like I became like an editor and publisher before I really found myself as a writer. So like what you hear now is me more established as a writer opposed to when I started 30 West. I just try to be like cheerleader, the hometown friend. I like to think of myself and like trying to uplift people. But it started off with myself. I know there's other publishers. I know House of Vlad with Brian Allen Ellis. He started or has continued to publish it himself. So I kind of emulated that before I even knew him. So I self-published myself and I figure, well, I'm getting some traction. And, at the time it was way back in like the mid 2010s. So, obviously tensions were everywhere with like the 2016 election, all that. So I decided, well, maybe if I turn whatever platform I have outward to the world, see if I can make any connections at Temple or, thankfully I'm, you know, from like the greater Philadelphia area. So there's plenty of poets, plenty of writers in general, just everywhere in this city. So I've been fortunate enough to publish well over 50 titles, I'd probably say more than over 60 at this point. But it's like you build off of your successes and your fallbacks too, because not everything is 100% going to go right. You may not know everything 100%. The best you can do is just learn on your own. If you have mentors or people you can ask questions, that's great. Some people, they may not, they may be apprehensive. And I've had some resistance, especially, kind of being like in my mid 20s, not really know what I'm doing, trying to burgeon myself into the establishment, quote unquote. And, I didn't really get any funding from Temple University or anything like that. So it was really all on my own. But I'm happy where it is and it's sustainable enough. And, there's always an investment for the future. So fingers crossed we can make it to the 10th anniversary. But other than that, yeah, just try to take it month by month, sometimes week by week, and even day by day. It's the best you can do.
That's beautifully said. And there are so many things in what you all just said that like I would want to pick up and ask follow-up questions about. But like one thing in particular that you said, Josh, that I love and that I was wondering if you could all share a little bit about was you mentioned like I actually was doing this publishing project while coming into my own as a writer. And so there's this like parallel between kind of finding your own voice, but also in publishing, hearing other people thinking about those collaborations that or even like Anna Kirby, you all mentioned like connections that are driven by having this project and thinking about it. And I wonder if you could say a little bit about what it has been like to kind of feel your own practice changing in like response or in conversation with the collaborations you're doing with the press or other sort of things in that vein, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. Yeah. We'll take that, I guess. Okay. So yeah, that's been an interesting part of it because New Myths being the debut collection for Lamb Lamb and the debut collection for us as writers it's such a beautiful like, flagship. But as in the process of bringing it to life and producing it and all the back end for the business and everything, our writing individually and collectively has grown and changed and evolved, and a lot of that has had to do with the connections that we've made and just broadening our scope of contemporary poets and reading more contemporary poets and not being so stuck in just our original influences, our original writing influences. Yeah, totally. Yeah, I would say because we were working on the second title. It's going to be a dual release with New Myths, and we reached out to it's going to be an experimental poetry collection, and the writer is Anthony Opal. He founds and runs the Economy Press, and just for instance, like working with his words has allowed our work to change and grow. So
yeah, I'll just put a cap on that and say being exposed to more modern writers has been a huge influence in not necessarily looking at what that modern writer did and emulating it, but just seeing new ways of thinking and writing in the context of poetry has allowed us to broaden our horizons, because I think we had a very, and not in a bad way, but an almost myopic view. We kind of kept our references incredibly tight for New Myths and just as writers in general. So one of the biggest I think, benefits and beautiful happenstances of connecting with other writers has been to be exposed to more contemporary work, like Erickson's work. We feel so connected to. Even Snarsky, some of them are contemporary and some of them aren't, but a lot of the work you publish to your Instagram page too. So just that ability to open up our scope has been valuable to us as writers. And I think as editors, we're just going to continue to keep expanding our awareness, because as Anne showed with Anthony Opal, we'll keep having amazing insight into not just new writers, but their processes as well. So I'm really looking forward to that.
Those are wonderful sentiments. And I'm fortunate enough to be in presence of one of my authors, Anthony Desmond. I remember publishing his poetry collection, his debut collection, all the way back in like October 2020s, when COVID was a huge impact in all of our lives. And, kind of like in that era, I wasn't sure where 30 West was going to go. We skipped out on AWP in San Antonio because there was like COVID was just hitting the US. So I bailed out. Thankfully, things went very well, and I learned a lot about just using those connections I made online over the past X amount of years, and trying to double down and making sure that we hold tight to these connections and not let go, because, I've seen many journals and lit mags just fold, for no reason at all, which, if you're all voluntarily doing this, you don't have any obligation to do it. But I think I brought up a question before about like, should journals have like a burial, so to speak? This is going on a little bit of a tangent, but if you're bringing something into the world, and it does well or maybe doesn't do well, it's still part of you. It's part of whoever the editors, whomever, it's part of something that you've done, and you want to hopefully keep it safe and secure, whether it's alive or not, so to speak. But yeah, back to the original question from Tom. I would say, yeah, I have learned a lot, as an editor. I try not to be too burgeoning into other people's styles, and I've still, sometimes I trip up a little bit and go a little too much when I'm like in the zone, so to speak. But at the end of the day, especially if these poems, stories, what have you, are already published, you have to let them be, because they've already been through the huge trials and errors that the writer sent out to lit mags, and maybe through other personal editors that they've had. So it's all about, just having enough grace to make sure that you're not overwhelming the other author or poet of your style, but also, you also need to conform to like a house style or whatever typeset you like to do, or font styles, what have you. So, 30 West has grown a lot. Like I remember Garamond was like our number one font, but now we use Georgia. Just those little things. I like to remember, like, when was the time when we switched, the big switch from Garamond to Georgia, and then we use another font for like our headers and footers and all that. But sometimes you capture those little things, like, for example, not human related, but I had a cat. Her name was Daisy. She was the editor in chief, and when she passed away in 2019, I got another cat. His name is Gray, which is, I guess, the heir apparent to 30 West. So sometimes you have to have fun with not only just the books you publish, whether they're handmade or what have you through printer, but just check people react nicely to it. Sometimes they just kind of pass it off or whatever. But it's your project and it's something you want to do. And if you get other people that love to do it as well, then by all means, share the love and share the space, especially when you uplift other people. And yeah, I'm not sure where else I'm going with this, but that's a wonderful question. Thank you for asking.
That's awesome. And I have a couple of questions. I have one for Josh and then one for you, Anne and Kirby. But I would also like to just invite our chat users one more time. If you have a question for our brilliant human beings, feel free to put it in there, because your questions will probably be better than mine. The question I wanted to ask you, Josh, was about because you mentioned that 30 West is going on 10 years. It's going on, I think the masthead is like 10 to 12 people, or something like that. And so I wonder if you could kind of talk about the way that the way that an indie press can grow, and how it can be like inviting managing editors, associate editors, and just like what it's like figuring that out, and if it helps with the sustainability and all those moving parts that happen. I would just love to, because my experience is pretty limited to much like smaller operations, 1 to 3 or 4 people. And yeah, I just love to hear about that because I feel like you said, the way it lives in the world very often kind of depends on having those folks who can help with the lift, as it were.
Sure. Yeah, that's a wonderful question as well. 30 West has like shrunk and bloated over the years. Originally it was me, and then I had like a house artist and one or two editors that may have, helped with one project or so. I guess originally I was very open to just literally whoever was like, somewhat literate, I guess, and helping just, it's like, hey, you want to read a manuscript? And then we eventually started a Tilde, our once long running magazine. That was kind of like a lit mag that we printed and distributed in house. That's when I started to meet, I feel like, our current core. Like we had certain amount of readers, and with those readers, I noticed like, okay, who's taking on more tasks? Who's spotting these wonderful poems or stories, and I'm a very merit-based person, so when I see somebody doing well and showing enthusiasm, of course I want to give them more opportunity because they want it and I don't want them to lose that spark. So as of right now, and then during with when COVID hit, that's when I feel like when until they eventually folded, but then I gained some of the readers and editors for that to be our current core masthead. And even the masthead as it is now is kind of shrunken and or bloated a little bit, but I just try to make sure everybody has enough assignments, especially when we're publishing, 5 books a year. I think last year was our one of our peaks with like 10 books, and this year is actually ironically another 10 books. That other story. But yeah, I just like to give opportunities to people who may not have it or may not know where to go because when I first started it, I had almost nobody. I had a class worth of 3 credits worth of whatever knowledge I had, and I try to make connections in my class, but some people were like, I'm doing this or I'm in another major, it doesn't matter. So, I just try to keep the doors open, but also like at some point you have to be like, okay, who's the core group? It could be one person, it could be a group of people. If you're a nonprofit, I guess you'd have like a collective of people who are bored. But in my case, it's like a small group. We like to talk every now and then. I've met almost everybody. Yeah, like probably like 90% of everybody, all over the country, even other parts of the world. So I'm very fortunate that people want to stick around, and I'm happy to give them work as long as we have it. And hopefully, with their investments included with mine and all the authors we publish, it'll turn into something beautiful once we hit our 10-year anniversary.
That's exciting. Now we can all put it in the calendar, which is really cool. And I was hoping that maybe Anne and Kirby, I know you might have some responses already to what Josh was saying, but I wanted to point actually to Will's question in the chat, which is kind of a strictly better version of my question that I had written down to ask you, which is about the role that you kind of both have in both being co-editors and also being co-authors of new myths. So Will's question verbatim says, I know that you co-author a lot, including new myths, and I'm curious about what your collaborative process looks like, logistically, but also intellectually, symbiotically, reverentially. I'd love if you could say a little bit about that, and then we have a couple other questions in the chat after.
Well, that's an interesting question. Very. I'll just start off by saying congrats on 10 years. Yeah, almost 10 years. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, huge congrats. That's a big accomplishment.
Thank you.
Yeah. So as far as the process, thanks for the question, Will. I find that we kind of have 3 ways of arriving at a final poem. Or I guess 2 ways. One is that Anne writes a poem and that I would write a poem and then we edit each other's. So that's the first way. And the second way is we just sit down to write a poem together. We decide like, what do we want to say? What are we looking to do here? I think because we are so connected, obviously we're twins, we have the benefit of we're like aligned in a lot of ways. I think we have enough differences between our sensibilities that we challenge each other as writers, but it's not so disparate that we're constantly fighting over what we think is interesting or moving. So I think there's, and I wonder if you agree, a blend of that, of where it's aligned and where we're kind of pushing each other. And then as far as like logistically, we'll kind of leave each other to writing in our own way, in our own time, and say, hey, by the way, I wrote this, and you can go from there. Yeah, I was going to say, I would agree. Our tastes are aligned enough that we can arrive at something that feels right, whether it's a truly co-authored or it's like, I wrote this thing, do whatever you want with it. Like, I'm not precious. Like, it's now yours if you want it to be, kind of thing, which is, it's unique, it's different. But
then sometimes there will be those lines where it's like, I don't want to change that.
Yeah, there will be times where it's like, that one has to stay, or that. So all those little moments where it's like, you can start to see, not per se as a reader, because we don't delineate who wrote what at a certain point. Sometimes it's hard to even know.
Yeah.
Sometimes we'll have people ask like, who originated that poem, kind of thing.
We know who originated every poem, but once it's in each of our hands, it just becomes this like medley between us.
Yeah. Now moving forward, for instance, like the new stuff we wrote, like I wrote, Kirby might have given it a once over. Kirby wrote, I might have given it a once over. But like the new stuff we read on this call has been a little bit separated from that collaborative process.
Yeah.
So that might give some idea, though it's probably hard to know.
And who knows if in the future we'll keep exploring that. It's exciting to know where our kind of collaborative spirit will go.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Thanks for the question, Will.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. Yeah, and I wanted to follow up with there's a couple of great questions in the chat. I want to kind of combine two of them that feel like they're in a similar spirit, and very much your publisher hat going back on for a minute. Like Ivan asked, I'm curious, could you both share what qualities or themes you prioritize when selecting poetry submissions or thinking about poetry submissions for your press and how these align with your press's mission? And similarly, Lynn asked, what's it like having to parse out what's good and how do you all come together and figure out what type of content you want to put out? So I'd be so curious to hear this too, like, because Josh, I think maybe you mentioned earlier, like that word merit. Yeah, do you want to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, sure, I can do that. So a lot of poets that I end up finding and publishing, I actually meet in person first, whether it's by chance or I go to a reading that I'm interested in. Yeah, it's kind of like the Twitter to reading to publication pipeline, so to speak. Yeah, for me, it's, I'm not really a poet by trade. I'd say, more of a fiction writer. So when I can read a poem and then hear it and or combine a mix of the both, then I'm just like intuitively I can get like, okay, I either know the themes or I can hear like just the style of it, and just maybe I entertain possibly them sending me a manuscript. But sometimes, it could just be a chance, like, for example, I'm going to use one of my authors, Mandy 2. They submitted a manuscript, and one of my editors, Olivia Zarzicki, found it first. And she was like, oh my God, there's something about this that's so great. You have to read it. And I read it, and it's like about their home country and also, like their parents, and I believe like losing one of their parents. And I was just like, wow, like this is a lovely poet right here. And it turns out not only did we find Mandy 2, we also found a Lucy Zhang and also Alison Lubar as like a trio of very similar poets and a fiction writer. And it was just, it was a weird like confluence of, these three people coming together. We had no idea that they even knew each other, and they ended up becoming mostly friends and, like contemporaries in their art, and sometimes it's just a stroke of luck. That was literally a stroke of luck. And that was in 2022 when our press was hitting a very good stride. So, sometimes I have to, pass off, the editing or just like I call it like scouting duties to another editor because either their subjective taste may be a little better on that day than mine, or there's been something in the queue that people have been upvoting, so on and so forth. So it's like eventually I do have to see it. And most of the time it turns out very well. When it comes to fiction, that's a little different. Like I tend to like what I like, and some of the editors, they may defer to me, or depending on who it is, maybe I can check out where they've been published before, or are they local, and again, when it comes to knowing who these authors are and poets, I tend to think back, like Nick Gregorio, for example. I published his chapbook after hosting him live, and he's had his own career as a novelist and short story writer, and he had this very niche project for a chapbook, which we hand make. And in this case, we made like a comic book because he loves comics, and it had a presentation of a comic book. So we did this very limited edition print run of that. and also I continue to stock it in a very perfect bound way. That's all publishing terms, but I won't bore everybody. But yeah, it's just sometimes it's just meeting people or completely unsolicited when it's submission times, and we try to build our journeys along with them, whether they're debut poets and authors or this is just another notch in their publication cap. I'm happy to be part of their journey in any step of the way.
Yeah. Super valuable to hear your experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
For us, as far as kind of like what goes into the process of the work we find interesting or what aligns with kind of like Lamb Press, I think it'll be interesting to see how that process expands for us because we are so new at this. But for example, with the Economy Press title collaboration with Anthony Opal, something we really liked about that was how experimental that work was. And so I think two of the main kind of driving themes we look at or driving like interests we look at are, is there something that's really interesting to us that isn't just what most poets are doing? That's not to say odd for like odd's sake, but just something that has a really unique voice that it's kind of breaking away from the pack, like what you might see a lot of people submitting to journals or just a lot of people putting out there. So really like that, something that's really different and that maybe some contemporary journals wouldn't take a risk on, but that we just find is really special. And then also form as well, like as we were saying, photography with poetry, like or new myths, it's both poems and also illustrations. I just so you see, we have like some illustration spreads and new myths. So that's exciting too, and it kind of ties into what Josh was saying about the comic chap, like just really cool objects that we get a chance to put out in the world and just say like, I'm really cool that object exists and that we got a chance to make it.
Yeah.
Do you agree?
Yeah, I would agree. And I would say I see how the process evolves over time, but I think the constant is always what is my gut instinct, my gut taste tell me is interesting, and what would I want to have a part in putting out into the world, because it is a labor of love. Producing books is actually a lot harder than it looks. There's so much to think about, and so it's like, can I really be committed to this? Do I really love this, not just as a reader but as a producer of this thing? So really sticking with that gut instinct and knowing that it could carry through to every bump and phase of the production.
Totally.
Yeah, I'm happy that you brought that up, and Kirby. It's when I hand make chapbooks, I score the spines, I glue the books, and sometimes I sew the books when it's like a limited edition. And there are days when it's like if there's a big order or a special order, I may be like, oh man, it's like I just got off work or whatever I was doing, had to break away from X, Y, or Z. But I also fill in my life with 30 West. If I were to take this press and put it to bed, so to speak, I lose a part of myself at this point. So it's definitely a labor of love. And to everyone who may be curious about how presses work, it's like as long as you have it here and you really focus on your craft, whether it's editing or binding the book or just the writing in general, always keep that little spark and never let that fire die out, because you could easily be doing whatever with your life, but you're choosing to write a book, make a book, bind a book. There's many parts to this puzzle, and a lot of us, we may not be thanked all the time, but just having that book and seeing them go into mailers and stuff, it's almost like, oh, it's like, see ya. But at the same time, it's like, well, somebody gets to now indulge in what you put all your time in.
Totally.
That's really beautiful. The mailer says on their little voyage, like I think that's so great. And I have a couple of more questions for you. The chat blows up with a few other ones, but I wanted to ask you a little bit because you both mentioned versions of this. And I want to read Cole's question from a little bit earlier in the chat, which was directed to Anne and Kirby, about like the parallels that you notice. So Cole said, what parallels do you notice between publishing and writing and making and producing films? Do you ever think of submissions or pieces you include in the edition as scenes or vignettes of some kind? And I would love for that to be an invitation to share anything that strikes you about genre, because I feel like you all kind of spoke to that a little bit in some of your earlier answers. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's a really interesting question. I think that, and I'm sure as Josh can attest, when you put on like different writer hats, like screenwriter and then poet and then novelist, there's a piece of you that's in all of that, but you're kind of entering a different realm in your brain when you go to create that project. And so I don't know how, I feel like both you and I see it a similar way in terms of thematic orientation. So, for example, when we went to do New Myths and we were like, we have all these poems, what do we want to do with this collection? What does this really look like? We kind of saw it as a start and a middle and an end. We saw it as like a story unfolding through poetry. And I think that part of that came from us just being so in love with film. And I think that will also inform film. What do you think?
Yeah, and I would say that a similar answer of like what pulls on that gut feeling of interest is the parallel in terms of what do I like about film? What do I love about film? Why do I want to be a part of it? Is similar to poetry, photography, or any art form where it's like, how much is it a true representation of identity and personhood and what it is to be a human just trying and failing, even if it's done in an experimental way. And I love experimental films as much as I love experimental poetry, but sticking to that core, that spark, as Josh calls it, of like really what does it mean to create? And that can be seen in all art forms and in all mediums.
Yeah.
So I would say that that's like the broadest parallel that I can
agree to. And I'll just before Josh, I think the most specific parallel is just like vulnerability. I feel like if a piece, whether it's a film, whether it's a photograph or a poem, if it doesn't have the bravery to just be fully vulnerable, there's just a little piece that doesn't light up in me of interest and excitement. So just a little add on.
Yes, I'm going to answer that same question. I'm not a filmmaker, so I can't really say on film, but when I see a good film, and especially in the theaters, it's just it's either I'm stuck in the seat or it's just like, oh wow, I have to ingest all that. Like my girlfriend and I, we just finished Fool Me Once. It's like a British crime mystery drama type thing, and it's like I saw it like an onion, like peeling the layers of the onion. In this case, say if I'm putting together a story collection, like there may be stories that are very strong. They may have been published in a larger journal, and there may be some that have been published. So sometimes, the order may be necessary. Sometimes the order isn't. It's completely random. Speaking on a past book, Nature Trail Stories by Shannon McLeod, we published that last year, almost nearly a year to the day now. It was essentially, the author calls it bore core, which because it's like there's no plot, it's mostly just people meandering in the woods thinking. But when I thought about it and I heard Shannon's interpretation of it, it's not about the plot. It's not about, like going into the woods and finding a dead body or something like that. It's about just learning who you are as a person and reminiscing or using nature as a muse to find something about yourself, find out something about yourself. And once we finally got the book out there, I was like, oh yeah, like maybe I am a borecore enthusiast because I like to hike and be out in the woods and just maybe if I climb an ascent, just take a breather. It's like I earned the climb, but also I can enjoy everything that I see, whether it's panoramic or otherwise. And when I see like story collections or even chapbooks, sometimes a chapbook is a very condensed, small project. Even within a chapbook, you can micromanage kind of like, okay, maybe this piece is the lead off, the other one is really strong. Maybe that could happen afterward, or maybe you need a good closer. So it really, like I don't want to bring sports into the foray here, but sometimes like in baseball, they have like certain batters in certain positions because they know one guy can get on the base, and the other one can hit a home run right after him. So sometimes the order does matter, but sometimes you just have to go with your gut. Or if the author is completely 100%, this is the order I want, no change. It's like okay, it's like I'm more than happy to see where it goes and how people receive it.
Yeah, I just wanted to show my face quickly to say thank you. and for answering my question. But the reason why I ask is I'm a college student myself, and I'm kind of involved, well, fairly involved with the literary scene on campus, and we have one called Blackbird, and it's a magazine. It's sort of slapdash at the moment because we're students, but one of the things we try and talk about is kind of as curators making ourselves invisible in the process and during the process of curation. And I know that when we get submissions, we always get more than we expect, which is heartening. But I know we try and get like a mission statement going for each edition, but at the same time, it feels like this big away game, and we don't know really what to do. And so I'm curious if anyone here has dealt with that and this feeling of I want to like curate it, or I want to make a bouquet of submissions, but I also don't want it to be about my putting them together. I want it to be very respectful of the time and all of the beautiful work.
Mm-hmm. So that's a great great thing to think about in terms of keeping the integrity there, in terms of like the editorial vision. And I think, Josh, I'd be really curious to hear your input on this because you've had just more experience as an editor, but we've thought a lot about that moving forward.
And especially in working with Anthony of The Economy too. Like that was the kind of thing where it was like, we're just happy to shepherd your work and let your vision come through. With our work, of course, we're entirely in the weeds of it with each other. We're all over it. But with Anthony, that was an example of our first writer that we're publishing who's not us, where he was really clear on his vision. We really loved his vision for what he wanted to bring to it. And so we didn't feel the need to insert ourselves too much into it. Of course, if there was a way where it's mostly aesthetics, like how can this pair with Lamb Lamb, that was something we were finding a middle ground on. So as far as working with other artists and writers and really respecting their vision, I find if an author comes, we found this with Anthony, and they're really clear on what they want and we really see it. It's kind of like what Josh was saying with Borgcore. You feel a little more safe or comfortable to just really give them that space to shepherd their work. As far as putting larger amount of submissions into a bouquet, like a thematic bouquet, I'm curious what Josh has to say about that. As far as just for the future of Lamb Lamb, I think Annie and I have a vision as far as the works, the themes we want Lamb Lamb to explore: family, psychology, identity. But there might be a time where a work comes in that has nothing to do with any of that, and we love that too. And then maybe that just requires us to open up the mission statement of what Lamb Lamb is. So curious what Josh has to say about that too.
Okay. Yeah. When it comes to themes, I'm happy to hear that both of you have a very staunch, handful of themes and subjects you like to explore. When it comes to 30 West, we kind of just, it's more intuitive, I guess. Like I probably said that before, but I noticed that we're starting to get more into like nature. So like nature trail stories, obviously, Below the Falls, which is our next story collection coming out next month by Ross McMeekin. Similar vein, it's people outside, but there's some that are also like plot based, or it's like a relationship falling apart and they just happen to be outside, or they reconnect with like an event outside like that. So I've noticed that that's starting to be a thing. I know in 2022, How to Keep Time, a novel by Kevin Carney, we published, and a lot of it takes place literally in the New Jersey Pine Barrens, and there's a lot of like history and little anecdotes about it. So I would say that's kind of the 30 West theme that's developing right now. But I guess when it comes to, I guess, the past, when we used to do like a more of a serious lit mag, to answer your question, Cole, I was part of Hyphen, which is like Temple's undergrad literary journal. And when we would sit down to do our weekly meetings, we actually read submissions blind. That way, we have no idea who the authors are or poets, what have you. We just read, we try to be as objective as we can, and then the whole room goes for a vote. And then anything that has a majority of yes and maybes gets moved on to the next round. And then that's when like the masthead at the time would curate. So whatever their vision is, I have no idea because every semester, every year may have a different masthead. So I guess it could be spontaneous, or it could be, like they carry over a project that may have been shelved it last semester. That's now it's a whole new semester. They may have left notes for the next people. So I guess, just go with your gut and, try to have good brainstorming sessions with if you're on the masthead or if you just have like all your readers together, just try to be a little more democratic about it and see, what people think, take a lot of notes. Maybe I've been noticing rank voting is really popular with the 30 West method. I think we have to start implementing it a little more in the future. But a current project we're doing, we'd be doing a lot of ranked votes. So that helps out a lot. It keeps, not just like one or the other. We have multiple items to look at. But yeah, just always having, this poking the campfire, making sure it's like, hey, maybe we're a little dry on submissions about X. So let's try looking for Y instead, or maybe even a Z comes in. I think Ann and Kirby were talking about something random just comes in. And, 30 West, we've had a couple books that have just completely took us by surprise and just like, oh yeah, we have to publish this. So, you know, it's always good to have a vision, and sometimes people really, like hunker down into that, but sometimes it's good to explore, and you shouldn't fault yourself or the press for trying something new, especially if you feel that there's a stagnation forming, which no small press ever wants to have. But mostly the community is pretty receptive of whatever we like to do, and hopefully I like to see more of Lamb and see what comes up you guys next.
Likewise, thanks.
This is really beautiful. Yeah, thank you all so much for taking the time to converse with us. I feel like that's a pretty good note to wind things down on. And I just want to close with a couple of quick remarks. First and foremost, thank you so much to Anne, Kirby, and Josh for being here, for sharing your work with us, and for telling us a little bit about the inner workings of press life, the incredible difficulty of like making a book happen in the world, which is like every time it happens feels like a miracle. So thank you all for everything you do on that score. And also thank you to everyone who is here in the Zoom chat with us, readers for sharing their work, listeners for giving this hour and change of their lives over to poetry and asking beautiful, beautiful questions. I always just want to say at the end that if you are listening and you have some new shit that you have written and you want to read it, or you want to talk about your cool thing that you are doing, because I'm loving these like conversation style events, and I hope that we can have more of them. Please get in touch with me or with us, Nightlight Poems on Twitter and Instagram and stuff. Email me or DM me. I'd love to hear from you. We've got some really exciting lineups coming up. Our next reading is going to be on Thursday, March 21st, and we'll be continuing to schedule for the rest of the new year as well. And the last thing I want to do, just to close on the same note that we always do, I'm going to read just one poem to close. It's by a poet I really love, Noel Cocott, and it's called Reflections on Youth. The loose elements, this striving toward the kingdom. The body is a blessing. I wait in a foothold and bury the evidence. For years, a lamb strutted around on a hillside, never lonely. The milk of kindness is stirred in a gigantic pot. My shabby clothes, the sheen of them in the moonlight, I remember what I used to be. This is good, and it is also not good. Aristocrats and barley are carried on a little donkey, and now we end up with taxi drivers walking by the sea. The light raiment of my dark voice tells you a truth. The world will pardon me for being foul and mad for a time. Yet the dogs bark softly until the purple night wind is all but gone again.